What's going on, guys? Ever since I put the new motor in my boat, both times I left to the water with the lights working on the trailer, and both times I had to drive home with the lights not working. So that's roughly a 100% failure rate, and that's not good enough for Strange Garage. So today, we're going to convert the trailer to LED lights, and we're going to waterproof everything. And while we're at it, we're going to throw a whole new wiring kit in there. Anyway, check it out. My original intention was to use the existing wires to pull the new wires through, but everything was really tight in there and the wires were really badly damaged that it made that pretty much impossible. So instead I ran a single wire back up through the tubes, and then I was using a bent welding rod and I was able to snake everything through. There's better ways to do this, but this is what I have on hand, so I made it work. Once I got the single wire pulled through, I carefully electrical taped it to the new wires so that way as I'm pulling on it, it won't come apart inside of the tube. The longer runners of the trailer that start from the tongue and go all the way back, it was really difficult for me to snake those wires through, and like I said, I don't have the right tools. So what I ended up doing was I took a piece of fishing line and I used a paper towel tied around it, and I shoved it down the runner and I used an air compressor to blow it down the tube. Actually worked pretty well. It's a good little trick. Once I got the fishing line all the way through the runner, I used electrical tape to tie it to the new wires and pulled it through, and coincidentally, the kit came with exactly the right amount of wire for this trailer. I'm ditching the incandescent lights that came with the kit because as soon as I get the trailer out of the water, they pretty much stop working, and not having trailer lights is the fastest way to get pulled over around here. The replacement lights I'm going to use are LED strip lights. Not only is this stuff waterproof, but you're able to cut it down to the length you want and solder your wires directly to it. So it's really useful, and it's going to be waterproof. That's the biggest advantage. The ground for these lights comes in through the trailer and it goes into the actual fixture through the two studs on the back, and then the studs attached to a metal plate that's inside of that. So we need to solder on some ground wires to that so we can attach them to the lights. The trick for soldering onto things that aren't really made to be soldered on is scuff it up with a little bit of sandpaper and then get it nice and hot with a soldering iron, and it should stick no problem. Next, I cut the lights down to the length that I want them and then carefully remove the rubber that's around the terminals so I'm able to solder my wires onto them. The only thing you really have to be careful about in this particular situation is don't cut through the light itself, and make sure you don't have any solder bridging the gap between the two terminals. Should be fine. The wiring is pretty simple. You obviously want to attach the ground wires to the negative terminals on the lights. And then it doesn't really matter which positive terminals you put on which lights, as long as each one gets one, it's going to work the way it's supposed to. Once I have all the wires terminated, I take a little bit of hot glue and I cover up any of the terminals or anything that any water could affect, because I want to make sure this is completely waterproof. Once I put the hot glue on there, I take heat shrink tubing that you can get at pretty much any hardware store. I slide that over the hot glue, and then when I heat shrink it, the hot glue actually squeezes out of the heat shrink, and so that makes a perfectly waterproof seal. Should work pretty well. After everything is to my satisfaction, I plug them into a little power supply that I keep in my house. So this isn't quite as bright as they're going to be when they're installed in the truck, but it should indicate whether or not they're going to actually work. Once I know that everything's working the way it's supposed to work, I can go ahead and install the lights into the fixture. The screws that go in that attach to the trailer itself sometimes are a little bit tight, so I use the nuts to pull them through the fixture and make sure that they're good and snug. I secured the lights down with a pretty good amount of hot glue, and I think they're not going to go anywhere, and even if they do, I can always take it apart and try again. But the big thing is making sure that they're waterproof and making sure that they function, which we're pretty lucky. They're good to go. Attaching the lights to the trailer itself is about as simple as it gets, but you want to make sure that you follow the right process, because getting water inside of these terminals is just as bad as getting water inside the lights themselves. The whole kit is color coordinated, so the lights on the trailer actually match the wires that come with the kit. And so on one side you have green and brown, on the other side you have yellow and brown. All you have to do is attach the wires to the corresponding color. Everything should work just fine as long as everything is properly grounded. The way I'm choosing to attach these wires is with heat shrink butt splices. So once you crimp them down, you actually heat shrink them on, so that makes a waterproof seal. But before I put the butt splice on, I slide some heat shrink down the wire a little ways. And so once I heat shrink the butt splices, I can put heat shrink over that again. I know that sounds a little bit redundant, but I really want to make sure that no water gets into here. A lot of people like to use electrical tape for waterproofing applications. It's actually really common, but if this is something you're thinking about doing, there's just one rule I want you guys to remember. Don't. Heat shrink. Use heat shrink. Electrical tape is not for waterproofing. And finally, attaching the lights directly to the trailer through the 2 studs on the back is what completes the loop, and theoretically, as long as it's plugged into the truck, everything should work just fine. Once all of your lights are wired up, you go ahead and plug the connector in, and then the little white wire that's dangling off of the pigtail, you want to go ahead and attach that to the trailer somewhere. Pretty much any metal surface will work. You just want to make sure it's fairly clean and it's holding the wire good and tight. That functions as your ground. You probably don't actually need it, but it's going to make your ground connection that much better. It's hard to tell in the video because my camera isn't very good for low light situations, but these are actually plenty bright for night and daytime driving, and hopefully they're going to be nice and waterproof, so I'm going to be able to get lots of life out of them. Anyway, thanks again for watching, and thanks always for doing your part to help make this world a strange place.